the last homework assignments are due next Wednesday. And let me just remind myself what the date is. Yes, on the 6th will be the last homework assignments, and there's a lot of them. It's the most we've ever had, actually, partially just because the linear equations homework is broken into 3 different sections. But we're also just covering, we're kind of cramming in some of the more basic material, and so there's a bunch of homework problems, a bunch of homework sets due. And I'm trying to avoid having homework due on like the following week, basically. I'd like to give you a week or so to fully focus on studying for the final. But anyway, to help sort of combat the large number of homework assignments that are out there, what I did was I went through each assignment and tried to pre-mark correct some of the problems to reduce the total number you have to do. So if you start looking into some of the homework assignments that are due next week, you'll see that some of them are already marked correct. And that's because, again, I'm just trying to mark some correct. So you can still look at them and practice them if you want, but you don't have to complete all of them, right? Like the way I usually set up homework assignments is like 2 or 3 of each type of question or something like that. And so instead of doing 2 or 3 of each type, just maybe like 1 or 2. And some of you have already started noticing that. I know you're going through and saying, hey, some of these are already marked correct. That's because I'm trying to reduce the amount that you have to do for next week. So just keep that in mind. So there are 6. That's a lot of assignments, but I have tried to reduce the total number of problems. With that in mind, here's the rest of the schedule. So linear equations were for today, and then polynomials for Monday, rational functions for Tuesday. These are the last 3 sections, and then we'll spend sort of, like I mentioned, the last week or so just finishing the homework and then studying for the final. I did have a couple questions to answer, but does anyone want to ask any questions right now? Any sort of general questions about the course or anything I just said? Okay, so I didn't get any real questions, well, like specific questions. The only question I got was related to graphing exponentials and logs. A couple people had some issues with that last night, and so I just want to do a quick summary of graphing exponentials and logs. And you can let me know if this is helpful or if there's anything else you want to talk about. So generally, exponentials look like this. That's what a to the x looks like. As long as a is bigger than 1, it goes up, right? If it's less than 1, it would go down. But let's just assume that it's going up like that. So the shape is one thing, but the other key thing to remember is they have these horizontal asymptotes right down here. And so that's important because it says like this left side doesn't go past the dotted line. And that becomes important when you try to graph these things. And then logs, since logs are the inverse of exponentials, you can just take this graph and flip it along the line y equals x, and that gives you the graph of logs. And so logs then look like this. And instead of having the dotted line here on the x-axis, right, they have the dotted line right here on the y-axis. So that would be log base a of x. And so since they're inverses of each other, they have like similar intercepts, right? So the y-intercept on these ones is 1, which when you flip it over here, this becomes the x-intercept over here at 1. So in other words, logarithms have x-intercepts but not y-intercepts to start, and exponentials have a y-intercept to start but not an x-intercept. And the key thing about graphing them is when you move the graph left or right with logs, the dotted line will move. And when you move the exponential graph up or down, the dotted line moves. So that's the key thing that like most people end up messing up on tests or potentially the homework, is that the dotted line, which is known as an asymptote, which we'll talk more about in the rational function sections, moves in exponentials I'll just leave it like this. It moves with the graph. right? And so if you move this, the logs left or right, the dotted line is going to be in a different place, right? If you move it up or down, the dotted line is just going to stay. If you move exponentials up or down, the dotted line will move, but if you move it left or right, the dotted line doesn't go anywhere. And so that's the kind of the key thing about graphing these things, is really making sure the dotted line moves along with the function itself. Now, the person who asked me this question, who sent this email, doesn't appear to be here, but I did want to just sort of cover this so it would be in the video that I post. I will direct that person to here. Maybe we can talk more about it. But are there questions about that at all? Or would people like to go into depth about an example? Or were there anything in the homework last night that you weren't able to get that maybe we can look at together? Anything like that? Okay, I'll have to try to catch up with this person later and see if I can help more with that. Are there general questions about linear equations? So the thing you were supposed to watch today were about equations of lines. And equations of lines, I'm confident, is something you're familiar with, like slope and intercepts and things like that. But putting it all together can be kind of tricky, especially things like parallel and perpendicular lines. And so I'm happy to answer some questions about that, but based on the silence here, I'm assuming people either don't have questions or have not yet looked at that video. Is there anything I can do for you this morning? Just like the weakest morning yet. You guys are really petering off here. Please try to finish this strong. We've only got a couple weeks left. Really want to pass everyone in this course, which I'll remind you includes passing the final exam, which you can absolutely do. But you just got to put a little effort in. Looking at the people who are here, I don't think folks in this particular chat have a problem. But anyway, I'm happy to answer questions. So I'm going to shut my mouth for a minute and see if anyone wants to say something.
Dr. Levy, perpendicular lines. I can't remember. Is the formula, is it like the reciprocal, if I remember? I'm trying to remember. It's been a while since I've dealt with parallel and reciprocal perpendiculars.
Yeah, so if you're given a slope m, parallel to m is m. So you have the same slope if you want it to be parallel. And if you want it to be perpendicular, that doesn't make sense. Parallel to m. What I wanted to say is a parallel line will have slope m. A parallel line also has slope m. And a perpendicular line has the reciprocal, like you said, has slope 1 over m.
Okay, so, thank you.
But the key thing to remember with that is you need to figure out what the slope, like a common question is, here's a line, what's the slope of something parallel or perpendicular? And if you're given something like this, like 8y plus 4x equals 10, people get tricked into thinking that the 4 is the slope because it's against the x. But in order to look at the slope against the x, it needs to be in y equals mx plus b form, right? So if you wanted to solve for y in this one, then you could figure out the slope. So in other words, 4 is not the slope of this line. You would have to solve for y. And when you solve for y, you get y equals minus 4 over 8 plus 10 over 8. And so this is actually the slope, which is minus 1/2, of course. Anyway, that might be more than what you're thinking about, but since you mentioned that, I thought I'd throw that out there. What else? So on the final things I usually ask are, here's a couple points, write the equation of the line, like what's the slope between these points, what's a slope that's perpendicular or parallel. I don't get too crazy on those. I don't get too crazy on those kind of questions. I just want you to basically know the basics. Anything else I can do for you this morning?
I got a question regarding the homework.
Sure.
Is there any reason why you gave us 6 web works for this week? 'Cause I was planning on studying for the final.
So did you hear what I said at the beginning
Like
there?
once I have other classes and stuff and other finals. With having 6 web work, which is like no more than double the amount of web work we have usually every week, why do we have 6?
So I'll ask you the question I just asked you a second ago. Did you hear what I said at the start here? Do you want me to repeat that?
I understood, yeah, with you knocked off some of the questions for us.
So are you just looking at the pure number? I mean, have you even looked at how many problems there are? What if each one has one question?
I looked at the numbers. They like have at least half a dozen on them.
So there are, let's see here, 10, 20, 30, approximately 40 problems. When do you have finals?
I have finals in 2 weeks, but I plan on studying for the final for this class this week. Like, I think it's okay us having only 3 web works due this week.
Say that. What was the last thing you said?
I anticipate us only having 3 web works due.
Sure. So listen, I don't think it's fair to expect that your classes are going to stop assigning you homework 2 weeks ahead of your final exams. Usually the final exams are like a day after classes end. And as I mentioned, I've knocked off close to 20 problems out of those, and you're welcome to just not do them too. You particularly, Cameron, have a very high homework average, and I'm going to drop the lowest 3 assignments. So you could just not do them if you want. That'd be fine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You know, I am sympathetic to the number of assignments, but I'm also trying to prepare folks for the next stage here, and I want to see that you can do this stuff. So, anything else I can do for folks today? What else is on your mind? Okay, well, thanks for showing up. I'll just reiterate again, I'm around at like all times of the day or night. So if you want me to pop on at night while you're working on this stuff, let me know, or during the day. I would be happy to do that. And I do that for some people, but not a lot of people take advantage of that. But do whatever you need to do to be successful. Okay, I guess I'm going to sign off here and stop recording. I'm going to hang out in case anyone else has any questions.